which three formational threads do I choose, and which ones do I leave out? In many ways, each of our lives is like a fabric, a tapestry, and it just has so many formational threads. So there are many formational threads that are very important in my life, which I'm not going to be referencing. I won't be speaking about my family of origins, mom and dad, my sister. I won't be sharing at depth my own experience of conversion. I didn't grow up in a consciously Christian home. And it was in my teenage years, really, through a friendship that that the love of Christ ambushed my heart. And I won't be speaking about that. I won't be speaking either about my long journey in therapy. It lasted most of my 30s, dealing with a lot of childhood pain and wounds, and profoundly formative in the way that I did ministry as a consequence of that therapy. But I won't be talking about that. I won't be talking about the many mentors and teachers that I've had along the way, also profoundly life-shaping. I won't be speaking about my own journey of study, which has been formative. The many books that I've read, many of which have become very, very dear friends. So as you can see, there are so many dimensions of formation that I'm leaving out, and I'm really hoping and praying that the three that I have chosen, and I've obviously chosen these particular three threads with this journey in mind. So I'm hoping that somehow, as I share these threads with you, that there will be some resonances with your own spiritual journey and life with God. The first thread that I would like to share with you is the formational thread of my marriage. That is a picture of Debbie. Debbie and I have been married for 41 years. We celebrated 41 years of messy marriage 2 weeks ago. I must confess that before I got married, I thought I was a pretty decent guy. I thought I was pretty good guy. And there's nothing like marriage. It's almost like God's natural way of doing therapy with us. There's nothing like an intimate relationship to bring to the surface all the stuff that we need to deal with. And certainly, in my marriage, that has been true for myself. Just bringing to the surface kind of levels of egocentricity, self-interest, self-centeredness, bringing to the surface some very painful ways in which I related, particularly, and I want to mention this one, that very often in moments of unhappiness in my marriage, I would tend to withdraw kind of into a kind of, a distant coldness. And I'd be nice on the outside, but inwardly I'd be quite withdrawn. And I know today, in a way that I didn't know then, just how painful that was for Debbie. And so marriage became a context, a crucible for me, in which the Spirit of God had to and continues to do a lot of inner renovation. of my own heart, mind, my character, my behavior. I thought it may be helpful just to share three moments from my marriage. I'm also the father to Joni and to Mark. Joni is now 36 years of age. She lives in Sydney, in Australia, and that is Mark. And he lives in Auckland. He's just become a father of twins, our first grandchildren. And he, as I say, lives in Auckland, New Zealand. So I just want to share three moments that I think just reveal some of the mess and some of the bits of conversion that have happened for me within the context of marriage. The one was very early in my marriage. I was part of a kind of a young church plant in Kempton Park, very close to the airport. I was there for about 10 years. And it was my first congregation where I kind of was the leader. And obviously I threw everything into it. I worked very hard, but somehow painfully kind of put my marriage, my pastoral ministry, the church almost, in front of my marriage to Debbie. And I think that was a source of great heartache for her. But I remember coming home once, never forget it, coming home once and coming into the house, and there was a note on the table as I entered the lounge. There was a note from Debbie, and I can still remember it. I've memorized it. Dear Trevor. Now, I always say that when Debbie calls me dear, I know that I'm in trouble. Anyway, but the letter went like this: Dear Trevor, sometimes it worries me that I won't be worried whether you come home or not. I want to reconnect. Love you always, Debbie. And for me, that was like, and I think maybe all marriages have these moments, it was like a burning bush moment. And I knew that God was in that encounter, in that letter, and that I was being called into a radical rearrangement of priority in my own life. And it was in the days and weeks following that letter that some of that reprioritizing of my life took place. But let me quickly say that things were not plain sailing from then onwards, and the journey of conversion within my marriage continued. I think just recently, this is the second moment, was it 2 years ago, Debbie had a knee operation. And while she was recuperating, the doctor came to her and said, Debbie, you will need to have a full-time nurse for 10 days because you're not going to be able to do anything. You need to be in bed, you need to rest. And my suggestion is that you hire a nurse aide for these 10 days. And Debbie said, no, I don't need to hire a nurse aide at all. I've got Trevor, and Trevor will have to be the nurse aide. And so I kind of cleared my diary for 10 days to serve Debbie in whatever way I could. And I can still remember that, I just remember the first day and just, being constantly on call. Trevor, could you get me a glass of water? Could you make me a slice of toast? Do you mind putting the fan on? Do you mind cleaning up the dog crap outside? It was just constant, and I did my best, got through the first day. The second day, I began to get a bit frustrated, irritated. I think that's the best word, a bit irritated by these constant demands. Now, I've got to think about this. Here is the person that I say that I love the most in all the world, and I'm getting irritated because she's asking me to do things for her. And again, it was just like one of these moments of self-revelation, of the poverty of heart, in being able to really love deeply. By the third day, I need to confess, I was calling upon the Trinity, each member, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I needed all the grace and all the help and all the mercy that I got. So it was an experience that did push me into some desperate prayer. But again, it was one of those, just one of those moments that revealed the need for ongoing conversion of my own heart. The third little moment of formation, again, just is a very small moment, but a big moment for me, concerns my daughter and later my son. When my daughter was 18, she, on the last day of school, of her school career, that evening, I can still remember it, she got onto the plane to go to London. And this was my daughter, over whom I had been able to keep an eagle eye, going off to London for, I think it was about 5 or 6 weeks, to listen to her favorite punk rock music in all the underground clubs of Camden Town in London. Now, you can just imagine, I'm sure you can, how my imagination just ran riot. What would my daughter be getting up to in underground clubs in Camden Town without my eagle eye? And I can still remember that moment of her walking through the exit door of the airport, going to London City, not knowing anyone in that big city, to be on her own. I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep for I think it was about 3-4 nights, tossing and turning each night. And eventually I knew I needed to process my anxiety, my lack of trust. And so I wrote her some words, and I've got them in front of me here. I gave them to her. I sent them to her when she was in London. She tells me that she still has these words and often looks at them. And 2 years later, I in fact gave the same words to my son. Let me just read them to you. I believe that you were created to live freely. I place your life into the loving hands of your Creator. I let go of my clinging hold on your life, and I'm willing for you to make your own choices. I no longer want to play God in your life. And I will not believe that I always know what is best for you. I want you to live your own life according to your best understanding and light. I respect the image of God in you. And I want to learn to love you with open hands. I love you, daughter, son, and I bless you. I have confidence in you, and I always will. And I guess just reading those words again in this moment helps me to realize how just the formational thread, of learning to let go in love, of learning to love with open hands, of learning to let the Creator deal with the creature, and me relinquishing the role of playing God in people's lives, how all that kind of stuff was going on in that moment for me. So those are just 3 brief cameos of just some of how formation for me has just taken place in the, in the messes and the muddles of intimate relationship, of learning to be a husband, learning to be a father. And the journey continues. Now, Debbie and I in our 41st year of marriage, and I'm so grateful for those years. I really am. But now, as we get older, the losses get greater in many ways. So we are learning to live with a lot of loss, a lot of grief in our life. And how are we there for each other at this moment in time? Learning to live with a lot of diminishments. How do we continue to love each other, to serve each other? And how do we navigate this season of life? What does God's calling and vocation look like in this particular season of our lives? So that's been one very, very deep formational thread in my life. My second formational thread, I don't know if you recognize that person. That's Ignatius of Loyola, father of the Jesuits. And you may be wondering what a good Wesleyan like me is doing with a Jesuit like Ignatius of Loyola. And there's a backstory to this, and if you don't mind, I'd like to share it with you, because again, there may be resonances just with my own formational threads and maybe with your formational threads at this moment in time. In 1978, when I finished my first bit of study at Rhodes University, South Africa, I had a brief time before I took up my first ministerial pastoral appointment in South Africa. And I went across to Washington, D.C., where I kind of, I guess the word would be, interned for about 5 or 6 weeks. The Church of the Savior, not many people know of it today, but a remarkable little ecumenical community, downtown Washington, D.C., commitment to the city. And they were I think, the people who put on the map, I think, the language of journey inward, journey outward when it comes to Christian faith. And they had a wonderful pastor, Gordon Cosby, a Southern Baptist. It was a covenantal community. People adopted a certain covenant, a rule of life, as it were, which they renewed on a yearly basis, which committed them to an inward journey as well as an outward journey. And I really was profoundly, profoundly touched by the life of this church and its mission and how it held in tension the contemplative dimension of life and the missional dimension of life, and just how they held these two together. And so in 1978, I kind of, there was the seeds of a dream were planted in my life that I would like in South Africa to plant a covenant community in the inner city of Johannesburg. That was my dream. And it was a dream that I nurtured for about 10 years. As I pastored a conventional Methodist church, I kept just nurturing this dream. And in 1989, remember, I'd been at the Church of the Savior in 1978. In 1989, I asked permission from the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, asked permission to plant a new congregation in Hillbrow, Johannesburg, in the city of Johannesburg. And permission was granted. I indicated my I indicated my intention to my local leaders that this was happening. They began to a search for a new pastor, and Debbie and I and our two young kids got ready to move to Johannesburg. It had one final rubber stamp to undergo, which was the rubber stamp of the connectional national body. And it didn't get it. So there I was kind of caught in nowhere land. I had left a congregation. I had been planning to plant a new congregation, and permission was not granted. And so I was faced with a decision whether to submit to the wisdom of my denomination. I could have left, obviously, and just done an independent church plant. But I had made a vow to my denomination that I would go where I was sent. That was foundational to my ordination vows, and I decided to keep them. But I had nowhere to go, and it was in that time of uncertainty that a nun, Sister Maureen, said to me, Trevor, you need to do the exercises of Saint Ignatius. Now, I don't know what you know about the I don't know what you know about the spiritual exercises of Ignatius. You can either do them in one of two formats. You can go and do them in a secluded retreat for 30 days, or you can do them in daily life, praying 1 hour a day, meeting with the person who gives you the exercises once a week, and doing an examen in the evening, a reflection on the day. So it was a huge commitment, and I decided to do them. And Sister Maureen said, down the road, there is an Anglican monk. His name is Father Andrew. He'll take you through them. And I went and I knocked on the door of Father Andrew. And I asked him if he would take me through the exercises. And so for 9 months, well, about 10 months, Father Andrew led me through the exercises of Saint Ignatius. He always used to chuckle to himself. You know, he kept chuckling. He was quite an eccentric man in many ways. And he would keep saying, I don't know what a high church Anglican like me is doing with a low church Methodist like you. But that was the genius also of the exercises, because the exercises bring people together from every kind of background. That's been their genius for 5 centuries. So I did the exercises, and it was a profound time for me of formation. And in preparing for this moment, I just wanted to tease out how the exercises exercised a formative effect on my life. I think I had never prayed so much in my life. For 10 months, I prayed every day for an hour in the morning, and I did an examen for 10, 15 minutes in the evening. I had never done that before. I had spoken about prayer, I had taught about prayer, preached about prayer, but I never had carved out that kind of space in my life. And so I was kind of experientially immersed in the world of encounter with God in prayer. And it was, it kind of opened up a new landscape for me, which continues to this day. And I'll always be grateful for that. The second thing that I really am grateful for is that as I did the exercises, during each phase of the exercises, you pray for a grace. You ask God to give you something, to give you a particular kind of grace. And in the second week of the exercises, I prayed for the grace to come to know and to love and to follow Jesus Christ. And somehow that grace has never, ever left me. Just the grace of experientially coming to know Christ in my life today, to learn to love him, what that means, and to follow him. And I think it was as a largely, there were other influences as well, but largely as a consequence of the exercise, that there was a centrality to Jesus Christ that kind of impressed itself very deeply upon my heart and mind. And that continues today, as I said. I think the third thing that happened, and this may have a resonance with some of you, was I had to rediscern my vocational calling. Remember, it had taken place against the backdrop of a dream being shattered. And I can't know, had I discerned things wrong, had all these kind of wonderings were going on in my heart and mind. And the exercises provided a container for me in which I again could discern the shape of my personal calling, of my vocational calling, to really give it shape. And I made, as a consequence of that discernment journey during the exercises, I made some very big decisions, primary of which was to step away, for myself, to step away from pastoral leadership. That was a bad career move, obviously. I just touched 40. So it was stepping away from that, stepping away from even leadership within my wider Methodist belonging. And I began to shape my vocational calling around, and I'm putting this very simply, around the accompaniment of men and women in their lives with God. I just had a sense that God was saying to me, calling me, inviting me to companion people as a listening presence on their journeys of faith and life. The picture of those two people on the Emmaus Road is a kind of biblical metaphor for me. And so for the last, since then, for the last 30 odd years, that has been what I've sought to do. And obviously one does it in different contexts. I stepped away from congregational ministry 5 years ago when I retired. I had been part of a pastoral team for just on 30 years. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, in surprising new contexts, been given opportunities just to get alongside people on their own journeys of faith and life. Sometimes it happens within a teaching context, a retreat context, and even now, as I sit with you, I have a real sense that this moment of sitting with you is a bit of a consequence of that discernment, of that discerning journey through the exercises. And so I really need to say that for myself, I'm deeply grateful to Ignatian, to the exercises in particular. I love giving the exercises today to others and helping and training other people to do so as well. The last formational thread that I would like to share with you, let me just quickly give you a context for that picture. There is Debbie, the woman I'm married to. She's kneeling in front, and she's kneeling with one of her classes that she teaches here in Benoni. I was born in South Africa, and I grew up in South Africa. And Dallas Willard, certainly one of the main mentors in my life, a wonderful friend and companion on the journey. Dallas Willard would often say, and I really think he gets it right. He says, we receive a spiritual formation from the very moment that we are conceived. We are being formed. Whether we like it or not, we are being formed. And our formation is for better and for worse. Hitler had a spiritual formation. You have had a spiritual formation from the very moment you were conceived, and so have I, for better, for worse. And the formation that I received was one of being born as a white person in South Africa in 1951. In 1948, apartheid was adopted as the formal policy of our country, and that kind of legalized what had been going on for years, effectively giving political rights only to white people. It was a dehumanizing policy, a demonic policy that dehumanized 90% of our population. We lived in highly segregated neighborhoods. And so from a very early age, and I came across a phrase the other day in an academic publication, and it summed it up for me. From a very early age, I was recruited into whiteness. I was spiritually formed as a white male in South Africa. And along with all of that, there came privilege, condescension, superiority, arrogance, all that kind of stuff, which I'm not proud of, but which I've had to face very honestly and non-defensively. I am so grateful that when Christ got hold of me as a 16-year-old, he led me to the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. The Methodist Church of Southern Africa is predominantly a black church. It's about 90 to 93% black at the moment, 7% white. And when I say black, I mean black African, colored Indian, and then white. We have 4 major population groups in this country. And so even though when I was converted, even though our congregations were segregated, they had to be, they're not segregated anymore, but even though they were segregated then, at other levels, we got together as Methodist people. And this was a profound grace for me. I just feel that I just am so grateful to God. In my early 20s, I went on a 3-month training course, a leadership training course run by the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. There were 28 of us. We lived together residentially, breaking the rules for 3 months. It was predominantly black. All my teachers were black. And so for the first time in my early 20s, I discovered my neighbor, my black neighbor, my Indian neighbor, my colored neighbor. And it was a profound experience. I always say it was a time when I had to say farewell to innocence. I could not say again, I didn't know what was going on in South Africa. And it's a real formation of my life took place. From that moment onwards, it could be more conscious. I could consciously then begin to engage experiences and events and encounters that contradicted the society in which I grew up. But as I look back now, and I'm coming to an end, as I look back now on my formation as a white South African, some things are clear for me. Let me just share a few. The one thing that has become clear to me is how important it is, how important it has been for me to put listening at the heart of my life with God. That somehow, if I really am going to be a faithful follower of Christ within the context in which I live, I really need to listen very, very deeply to people. And I need to listen particularly to the suffering that surrounds us. And so for the last, since that course, I see my life very much as a journey of listening, of entering into the human experience of fellow South Africans. I think the second thing I learned was the importance for me as a white person in South Africa, learning to never think that I knew what was right for another person. And so much of my own ministry has been characterized by a response to initiative, to respond to initiative, and to respond particularly to Black initiative. And I'm just so grateful for every opportunity that I get, continue to get, of just being able to offer what I can to the healing and to the reconciliation and the restoration of this country. And the last thing I think I've learned from being a white person, white Christ follower in South Africa, is I think I've really learned about the importance of spiritual formation and how essential it is. And let me say why. For many years, we struggled against apartheid, and we had that wonderful moment in 1994 when we became a democracy, and Nelson Mandela was our first state president. And, you know, obviously we had high hopes of being a rainbow nation. We had a change, obviously, in political leadership, effectively leadership, correctly moved into the hands of Black people. But it also has been a profoundly disillusioning experience to watch how so easily we can be seduced, and how we can give up the struggle for a democratic country for the sake of personal wealth. And it's been really sad to watch the corruption, the looting of state resources, the ongoing indifference to suffering in this country. We are, I think, one of the most unequal countries in the world at the moment. And so it's just really been painful to observe that, but it has highlighted for me the fact that we just cannot have a new future without new people. And that political rearrangements, for better or for worse, political rearrangements are important, but they do not transform the human life in the way that human life needs to be transformed. And so as I enter into my 8th decade of life, I have a huge commitment to spiritual formation, to my own ongoing formation, and to the formation of others, that we may truly become human beings in the best sense of the word, that we may discover what it means to share a humanity. I often say that to become Christ-like is to become more and more human, contagiously human, beautifully human, compassionately human. So let me end. Thank you for listening. You've been generous in your listening. I've been long. But I just hope that the important thing is not my story. The important thing is maybe listening for resonances in your story, in your ongoing formation. So bless you. Looking forward to the ongoing journey with you. Thank you.